On today's episode, I review The Barefoot Investor by Scott Pape. I'll go through where I agree with Scott, where I disagree with Scott, and whether it truly lives up to that mantra of being a best-selling finance book. Hi everyone, I'm Ethan Rushock, and today I'm back for the first book review on this channel, which, as discussed, will be The Barefoot Investor. Now, as you'll see, I have the 2018 edition, so it is a couple years old. Scott does release an updated version each year, but there's only been minor changes normally each year. Now, if you've been living under a rock, then maybe you haven't heard of it. But even then, I still reckon you would have seen this book lying around somewhere. It is everywhere in any place that sells books within Australia. Whether that's in person or whether it's online on an Amazon, it is there. It's normally in the top sellers, and the few times I've seen it, it's been pretty close to that number one. So the one I'm going through today is the general Barefoot Investor book. So that one looks like this. There is a families edition that I actually haven't read yet. I will get around to it at some stage. But yeah, today we're just focusing on the original, which I feel like is, from what I've read, is definitely going to be the most suited to the general person. This summary will go through where I agree with Scott, where I disagree with Scott. I'll also go through what methods from the book that I've adapted. I'll really want to touch on the ones that I've adapted, but I changed them to suit myself better. And I want to go through who I think the book's recommended for. The book is extremely well written. That's the first thing I can say about it. It's really easy for the general person to pick it up and go, yeah, I really get what Scott's saying there. It makes sense. It's not written in high in-depth financial terms that the average person goes, oh, this is too hard, I can't do it. It's written in a way that the general person can pick it up, even if they're completely uneducated on finance, can read the book and have a really good understanding of chapter by chapter what he actually meant by that. So it can be quite confronting for the average person to pick up a finance book and attempt to read it. But Scott's broken it down into 9 really simple steps, and then within each step, which is likely the chapters, it's got sub-points in there. So it's really easy to follow through. So the main concept that Scott introduced quite early in the book is the concept of buckets. So for those that are unaware and or haven't read the book, the bucket concept, look, it's not a new concept. It's been around for a long time, but it's the one that Scott prefers as his method. So the idea is breaking up your money into different buckets. So his main one is he has the general expenses bucket, which this covers all your general day-to-day bills. So your utilities, your car expenses. He also includes the mortgage repayments or your car loan repayments, so just the actual minimum repayment part. So as in that 60%, he does provide some breakdowns on what, say for instance, your rent or mortgage payment should look like, what your groceries should look like, what your utilities should look like, your car expenses, but they're just rough expenses. And I think they're going to vary very much depending on where you live. For instance, country versus metro, or even just what state you live in, where you're at in your life as to whether you're married with kids, whether you're single, whether you're still living at home with your parents. All these things are going to especially factor into that mortgage and rent repayment side of things. The way I like to do it is I like to get a really thorough breakdown of every cost. I like to do this once every 6 months kind of thing and go through and go, alright, how much do I spend on groceries per week? Then I might go, alright, how much is my electricity bill per quarter? I use an Excel spreadsheet to convert them all back to, for instance, in my case, I do weekly because that's when I get paid. And then I can see a real breakdown of those general expenses. So I like to keep mine at that 60% or so mark that Scott recommends, but I always want to try and work that down and bring that down as much as I can. In the past, I was capable to go, oh sweet, I'm earning more, I can just keep upping those expenses. But now I'm really savvy on trying to go, okay, where can I cut those? And if I'm going to take something else on that's going to go into my general expenses, is it really necessary? So the second part of this is what you do with that remaining 40%. So he recommends 10% goes as a splurge account, aka a spending account. So this is something I definitely follow. I was already following similar, but I've kind of adjusted after reading the book. And what I do, I have this linked to a separate account. It's got a debit card, and I can spend freely on this each week, knowing that if I use it all up, it'll get topped up the next week. and I can spend on it without having to stress too much about what it's going on, because it's a budgeted amount that goes in there, not necessarily what it is. So I don't break that budget down and go, oh, I can spend $50 on going out for tea and I can spend $20 on entertainment. I just have that set amount per week and I can spend that on whatever I want. But the biggest thing with this is if I spend it on day one, I don't want to then chip back into my other accounts because they're all budgeted for. So this needs to last that week, or if I know that I've got a big purchase coming up, it might need to last a few weeks. So the next part is he has what is called a Smile expenses account, which is again 10%, and I liken this to more long-term purchases. So I have a similar setup again, where I do put a little bit more than 10% because at the moment I'm looking to save for those more long-term purchases, such as holidays, major appliances around the house, furniture, etc. So the way I use this account is a set amount that goes in each week. I'm a bit more careful with how I spend out of this. So I have my long-term goals of, at the moment, I'm trying to save for a big overseas holiday. So I don't try and dip into this at all unless it's for one of those set goals. The last 20% he refers to as the fire extinguisher. This is probably the area where I kind of adjust things a bit, but I refer to this last 20% as this is where you want to either save for a house deposit. You might be at investing stage. You might be paying down debts. This is really for any expense that's going to, or repayment, that's going to, I suppose, further your long-term financial position. That's not a day-to-day bill, which is your general expenses. It's not spending money, aka splurge and smile. This is for everything else that's going to advance your financial position. So the other thing Scott covers in the first part of the book is talking about really trying to bring down those general expenses. So by making sure you're not paying unnecessary bank fees, making sure you're in regular contact with insurance companies, utility companies, to make sure you're not overpaying on those things. So regularly reviewing your day-to-day expenses. He also talks about having regular date nights, which is what he refers to them to, is to initially set up all these steps that he carries out in the book. The other area he talks on early on in the book is dominoing your debts. Now this is one that I think really doesn't suit everyone. It's on a case-by-case basis. So dominoing your debts is paying down your smallest debt first, then moving the money you're using to that to go to the second debt, while still always maintaining minimum repayments on all your debts. Now this might not be the best way financially, as far as if you've got a really high interest debt, then you might be better off to funnel your funds towards that. But the reason he recommends the dominoing strategy is for the simplicity of it and the rewarding feeling you get when you pay off one of those debts. So I think for the everyday person that really doesn't want to spend too much time on their finances and doesn't really understand a lot about that, then yes, I think that probably is a good approach. But if someone that wants to be a bit more active in their finances, I think working out strategies to reduce the amount of interest you pay overall is still the best option. So part 2 of the book talks about growing. So growing to Scott is growing your super fund balance and growing to build a deposit so you can buy a house. The other thing he talks about is growing funds for an emergency fund. Now a lot of this is where I discussed earlier about the fire extinguisher. This is what he recommends those funds for. Now this is the part of the book that might not be suited to everyone. While the first part, I think having buckets for your money and having a budget and being really savvy on what you're spending your money on, that suits anyone. It's very general advice and it's stuff people should all be doing. Now you might have slightly variations on it, but it's the general consumption of it is really smart. The second part of what we're talking about, the growing stuff, not everyone's going to want to do this in the same order. Some people may want to travel and are happy to rent and may not want to buy a house. Others may have investments that they want to chase that are outside of super and may not see the sense in upping their super balance. So while this part of the book, it steps it out, but I think you really need to think about whether it's right for you. The basics behind it though are once again really well written and smart general advice. So you want to have as much money in your super fund as you can when you retire. It's a great tax effective way to invest funds as well as potentially being able to claim tax deductions, etc. So his advice of upping your super to 15% may definitely suit a lot of people. Now obviously you need to speak to an advisor or do your own research into this to see whether that really is suited for you, but the general advice is pretty basic. The second part about buying a house, again, this depends on where you live, what stage of life you're at, etc. So the one thing I do agree is not overstretching and buying just to show off to your friends and family. So this is where a lot of people go, I'll get a 5-bedroom house, and they have 2 spare rooms that they never use, but are now spending extra, it might be $100 a week on their loan repayment just to afford space that they don't use, but it sounds good. So again, it's living within your means. The other thing he talks about is not borrowing money to buy a car. Now this is something I probably wish I had read 6 or 7 years ago when I was first in the market to upgrade my car, when I had a perfectly good car there. But I think you get sucked in as an 18-year-old out of school and go, I've got a first job, I can afford a car loan now. So I think this is really good advice that you don't need to rush and go spend money, especially on a car that's a depreciating asset. Now, if you've got a business or you're later on in life and you're in a better financial position, this may be more practical. But when you're young, a car loan can take up such a large portion of your income that then when it comes to budgeting, you're going, oh geez, I'm already committing 15 or 20 or even more % of my income to a car that's losing value. So I really agree with that point that I think you should be very smart with if you're ever going to take out a car loan. It should be more benefits than just upgrading to a flash car. The other thing he talks about in this part is the emergency fund. Now, he recommends not having this in an offset account and just having it as a separate bank account. That's something I disagree with. I think if you're good with your finances, you can keep any kind of emergency funds that you can offsetting against any debts, because this is going to save you interest in the long run. The other thing that he talks about is growing this emergency fund to 3 months of your expenses. I think that is a great idea, but it might not always be practical for people early on. So again, I think you've got to assess where you're at in your life, what type of job you've got, what type of job security that carries with it. Do you have children? Are you planning any big changes within the next few years? To work out how many months' expenses you really need in that emergency fund, or whether those funds could be useful elsewhere. But I definitely think the concept of having some kind of emergency fund is always needed, and I think you should try and get onto that as a first priority. That way, if you have major car repairs, if you've got insurance claims that you need the excess paid for, etc., you're all set to go. Even medical expenses, you may be out of pocket initially, but if you've got that backing behind you, you know that you can afford that and then deal with the insurance claims or rebates, etc. at a further date. The third part of the book talks about leaving a legacy, growing your retirement funds, etc. So again, I think these are all really important, and he covers a lot of really basics that are check what super fund you're in, check what fees you're paying, work out how much you might need in retirement, etc. And the one chapter that I really like is the one that he ends on, talking about leaving a legacy. So he talks about making sure that you don't leave a financial mess for your family and friends when you do pass away, which I think is really important, and a lot of people don't like to think about that kind of stuff, but you can just imagine the burden that may put on your family and friends. And he talks about a lot of really nice methods that you can leave that financial legacy that is really simple for your family to deal with, but also leaving memories for your family. So I think it's really cool that a finance book can touch on the personal side of finances and the personal traits that come with this kind of stuff. Alright, so that kind of gives you a bit of a summary of what the book's about. So now I want to go into a few key areas that I agree with and a few key areas that I disagree with and who I think the book is suited for best. So what do I agree with the book? Well, I agree really almost line for line with some of that stuff that's early on in the book about getting savvy with your expenses, making sure you got buckets set up. So I already had some form of this, I have a spreadsheet. I still carry that spreadsheet today because I think that works really well for me. I've made some adjustments to it, but the concept of having separate spending money, having a separate account for long-term spending, having funds set aside for investing or paying down debts, and really knowing what your general expenses are. I like to go a bit more detailed than he does, and I like to update that a bit more regularly. So I think by really understanding what things are costing you, even if it's broken down everything to a per week cost, and seeing what a percentage of your income that is, I think it's really interesting to see, Netflix, that costs me 1% of my income per week. Am I willing to give up that? Or you might go, look, that's only a minimal amount, I'm happy with that. You might go, it costs me 45% of my income just to live in this house. Am I living above my means? So they're all really interesting points. But I do agree with the general concepts he presents there. One thing that I was doing previously that I have changed is previously I was running my spending on a credit card. And I did find that by swapping that to a bank account, I actually find I don't spend as much. Whereas on the card, it was easy to go, oh, I have $100 a week. I'm at 90. I'll go to 110. I'll make up for that next week. Whereas if I got a separate account and I go, oh, I've only got $10 left. Do I want to tap into other funds? I go, no, don't want to do that. So I found that's actually brought my spending down. The next part I agree with is making sure that you understand what super fund you're in, what fees you're paying, especially those that have got self-managed super funds, which carry with it hefty fees. And you really need to look at what returns you're getting versus what you could be getting in just an industry fund. So again, I think it's more being aware of your finances. So being aware if you're paying an advisor, what you're paying for, what fees they're taking, etc. What fund you're in, what fees you're in. No one person can say, oh, this is general advice, everyone go into this fund, because first of all, that's illegal. And second, that's not going to be suited for everyone, but it's really doing that research yourself. And like I said earlier, the third thing I really agree with is knowing about what your plans are for retirement and leaving that legacy and leaving your finances in a way that it doesn't cause a burden on your family. I think this is just really important advice, that if everyone gets these things in place, get your will done, etc., then you'll leave a much easier legacy to leave behind for your family. Alright, so the few areas I disagree with Scott is it's not necessarily disagreeing with his advice. I think his advice is pretty good for the basic person that doesn't really want to worry too much about their finances. But I think there's definitely room to expand on things. For instance, I wouldn't recommend the book just for someone that's looking to invest. He's very conservative with his approach to investing, which does suit a lot of people, but may not suit everyone. The other area is maybe some of the timing of what he recommends, of growing that emergency fund versus buying a house versus when to invest, is that I think he's recommended something really basic, but this might not be suited for everyone, and it might not be throw all the eggs in one basket at once. You may want to do bits and pieces of those as you go. So I like to grow my emergency fund a bit. I also like to do some investing a bit, and I also like to pay down my mortgage a bit. So I don't want to go all at once for each one. I like to do bits and pieces as I feel necessary. And obviously as I get income increases, etc., I like to then reevaluate where do I want to put those extra funds. Who do I recommend the book for? Honestly, I'd recommend the book for any Australian. I really think having a read of this, it's not a huge read. You can get through it pretty easily. It's really easy to read, as I mentioned. And I think it really suits anyone that has money in Australia, which is pretty much anyone. I recommend kids, probably from the time they start working, to read something like this and start to understand money. I wish I had done more of that earlier in my life and started saving more from 14 when you first start working. While I recommend it for everyone, if you're looking to invest, it's not the book for that. It doesn't cover that in enough detail if you really want to be an active investor. So if you're looking to buy shares regularly or you're looking for property investment, etc., while this covers the really basics of that, I recommend that you do go explore further options on investing in particular types of products. Overall, I think the book is an excellent buy. You can pick it up pretty cheap at most places, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone that's looking to get that little bit more financial knowledge. Alright everyone, thank you for watching. I'd love to get your thoughts on the book. Where do you agree with it? Where do you disagree with it? If you've enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to leave a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. Thank you and talk to you soon.